It's Friday. Yeah. It's been a rough week as well. So, yes, I know it's Friday. It's good, isn't it, mate? Yes. You want to go out for a wee, don't you? Well, you can wait, because I've got 2 to do tonight. So, Friday, 23rd of September. Cracking on with, in fact, what number are we on? Because I'm slightly ahead of myself. 245. I better write it down before I forget. 245 and 246 will do tonight. So, first one tonight is this particular sample here, which was from Andrew A.P. Butler. Now I keep remembering to say A.P. Butler. So thank you very much for this. This is very, very interesting. I had absolutely no idea what this was, never heard of it before, not a clue. So it's from a company called Kelt, but it's Kelt with a K. And I think they're French because they specialise in cognac. But what they do with their cognac is they blend the cognac together and then they send it out on a ship for 90 days. And this is actually a blended malt that Kelt released. So it's Kelt Tour du Monde, as in Tour of the World, pure malt Scotch whisky. Now, pure malt is another term, another phrase, terminology that's used for blended malts. So sometimes you might see pure malt on a label, more of a slightly older bottling, kind of like 90s backwards. So the Johnnie Walker Green label used to be Johnnie Walker Green label pure malt, and there's other things. So pure malt tends to be, with a few exceptions that really cloud the matter and complicate things, pure malt tends to be terminology for blended malt, vatted malt, however you want to call it nowadays. So this Kelt company, as they do with their cognacs, they also do with this, where they blend it together. Now apparently it's 37 malt whiskies from every region in Scotland, blended together and then put on a ship that's then sent out to sea for 90 days. Now I don't think it does go around the world, but it certainly goes out out to sea for that long. Now Jefferson's is a bourbon that they do a version that's a ocean aged, I think they call it, or aged in ocean or something like that, where it's the same principle as this. The argument is, and this dates back to the early days of cognac, where it was discovered that if you put barrels on a ship to transport it overseas, during that time the motion of the ocean, as it were, creates more interactivity with the wood, because the liquid inside is constantly in contact with wood and changing and moving around. You've got changes in temperature, you've got changes in air pressure. There's a whole load of factors that are constantly agitating the barrels, agitating the liquid inside, pressure, temperature, the whole lot. So it's not, they're not turning around and saying it's maturing quicker than normal. It's just that their argument is that all this activity is actually kind of doing more to the liquid inside, and the interaction with wood and everything is kind of like even like ramped up to 11 compared to just sitting in a warehouse or sitting in a barn and just staying pretty dormant and just breathing normally. There's an argument you lose more of the angel share because of the changes in air pressure and the constant movement. What there isn't is a control almost, in terms of, well, here's the version that we've done at sea and here's the version that was just stuck in a cask in our normal warehouses, and here's the difference between the two. That would be really interesting. What I don't know is what Jefferson's do. This I don't know how old this is. This was a one-off bottling for employees only of the Invergordon Distillery, which is at Leith, which is here. And this was actually released in a 25cl presentation box. This is what the bottle looks like. Very fancy. I don't know how long ago this was. I can only find it for sale in auction. I mean, it was a limited edition just for the employees. I'm going to guess at about 10 years ago, but I really can't say. I've seen it on auction websites for about 50 quid. But because it was never on general sale, it's a bit hard to kind of put a value on it anyway. But it certainly sounds really interesting, and I'd be fascinated to know what this tastes like. But like I say, it would be really good if there was a version, and if Jefferson's do this, where they do their ocean age, but they also do, this is the standard version, to be able to actually compare directly. Because I just fear that it's a bit more of a, not a marketing tool, but it's a bit, the danger is it's a bit of a gimmick. and it doesn't really mean anything, but it would be cracking to find out. So in terms of this one, it's 40%. What distilleries there are within this, absolutely no idea. I've just read in a couple of places that it's 37, which seems quite specific, and they are from every region. So there probably will be some from Islay, Islands, whether it's Highland Park or Talisker or anything like that. It also depends on what you term as the regions, because there was a poll on Facebook, I think it was a Malt Maniacs and Friends, where they talked about what do you consider the Scotch whisky regions, because Diageo have their classic malts, but they ended up having like West Highlands as well as Highlands. Do you count Talisker and Highland Park as islands? Do you count Islay in with the islands? A lot of places, a lot of shops, books, everything like that tend to do Islay separate, but then you've got Lowland, Speyside, Highland. What do you do with Highland Park and Talisker and Scapa, and now the new ones that are appearing on the islands? So do you count them as islands? But Talisker, in terms of a flavour profile, is a completely different beast to all of the others, and is probably closer to Islay than it is with all the other islands. It's a really quite difficult one. Campbelltown as well. Campbelltown used to be a massive sort of epicentre of Scotch whisky. Now there's only 3 distilleries there. So is it really worthwhile calling 3 distilleries a region in Scotland? So do you just incorporate it in with the rest of Scotch whisky? And then what do you count it as? Do you count it as Lowlands, Highlands? What do you do? Obviously not Speyside, because it's the other end of the country, but it's that sort of, where does the delineation? So it's possible that they've said, right, every Scotch whisky region, but are they counting Skye separate, or are they counting that in islands? And in which case, which of the islands is it? Really, kind of like a burnt orange colour to this. I'm not sure whether you're going to be able to pick this up. Whether it's had colouring added to it, I've no idea. I'd be surprised if it had, because this does seem to be a pretty small batch, kind of unique bottling, just like as a one-off. So I'd be surprised if it was. The cognac is in new Limousin oak cask, so I'm willing to bet that it's probably been like blended and then put in casks, maybe cognac casks, or maybe they've sourced some from somewhere else just for this one off. But it is a kind of a nice burnt orange colour. Interesting on the nose. There is a bit of smokiness on there, but it's not too overpowering. It's not too intense. But there's an oiliness to it. There's an oranginess to it. There is a very soft, subtle smokiness. There's not really an iodine element, but there is a definite bonfire smokiness. But then there is a rich sweetness to it as well. Interesting. There's a slight sharpness to it as well, which doesn't quite fit in with the rest of it. Just a little bit sour on the nose as well. It's not overpowering, but it's just detracting slightly from the other flavours that are there. Starts off quite interesting. You get a burst of peppercorn, you get a burst of smokiness, there's some toffiness, but on the finish it kind of dies away, and then right at the end it turns a little bit ashy, but sort of the middle to 3/4 of the time it's in your mouth, it just disappears. It starts off quite strong. There's an intensity to it, it's quite interesting. There's a bit of smokiness, there's an orange peel feel to it, and then it just disappears, and then kind of comes back with a slightly ashy flavour, and in between it's just a little bit flat. It's quite sweet, it's malty, but it's not rich or deep. There's a bit of a nuttiness to it as well. Now there's a little bit more on that, and it's a different pepperiness. It's like, and it's kind of Talisker-esque smokiness. It's a bit of an oddball. It sort of works, but it's almost as though all the flavours aren't as sort of combining and mashing together and just running a little bit flat. They're not really coming at you in different waves and giving you different types of flavors. It's a bit like they're all coming at once and they're cancelling each other out. So it's not really intense and with 6 million flavors going at once. It's like they're all coming in and just go bleh, and they don't really complement each other that well. There's little pockets of flavour, so there's a bit of nuttiness, there's a bit of orange, there's a bit of malt, there's a bit of toffee, there's a bit of smokiness. There's not really any TCP flavour, but everything doesn't quite work. They cancel each other out rather than marrying together and dancing on your tongue. And on that one, again, it just fell apart halfway through. Disappears, absolutely disappears. Pops up a little bit again at the end, a little bit of ashiness. It's an okay whiskey, but I'll be perfectly honest, the story behind it is far more interesting than the whiskey itself. It's like they've just boshed a load of whiskies together, stuck it in a cask, sent it off in a ship, but not really done much work to start with in terms of the blending, in terms of it's literally like, we'll have that one, we'll have that one, we'll have that one, pour it in the cask, off it goes. We'll sell it, we'll do it. They've not really kind of tasted it first and considered it and gone, yes, that flavour balance is really good, let's send it out to sea and let's see what happens with it. And it might be because this seems to be, I could be wrong, but this seems to be a limited edition, almost like a one-off. They've done a whiskey, they specialise in cognac, and they've done this whiskey for Invergordon employees. Invergordon may well have had a hand in it. It's entirely possible that they've sourced some of the whiskies themselves, but it's a little bit of a letdown because of the story behind it. It feels like the work that's gone into it, it deserves a better whiskey at the end result. It's okay, it's far from a bad whiskey, it's eminently drinkable, but it's just a little bit flat and a little bit, yeah, it's okay, but, and I've seen some people on the net where they've got the bottle of it and they haven't opened it because they've no idea what it is, or they've got given it as a present or anything like that. And it's almost, it would be one where if I knew the story behind it and I'd got a bottle of it, or I had a family member who was an employee, I'd probably rather keep it as a keepsake, because I think, having tried it, it would end up being a little bit of a disappointment if you were to open it. Unless you were in one of those frames of mind where you are expecting it to be a very good whiskey because of the story behind it, and you end up overcoming the kind of faults that are within the whiskey, and you go, oh, it's actually really nice, oh, it's very, very easy to drink, oh, it's absolutely fantastic, because of the story behind it. And you're overcompensating, and kind of your subconscious is telling you it's better than it actually is. That's part of the danger, because a whiskey, trying to look at it objectively, is okay, it's just not quite balanced. It's just not married particularly well. There's not as much care in the actual blending of the malts together as there is the actual method of the madness behind it. Bit of a shame. I was quite looking forward to this, because reading up on it, it was actually really interesting to see what was going on behind it. Right, Andrew, thank you for that anyway. Absolutely fascinating. Not a chance in hell I ever would have come across that otherwise. Never even heard of it beforehand. So very, very interesting indeed. I'm going to do a quick rinse out, and then I will do probably the best known blended malt outside of Johnnie Walker Green Label that you can find on the market at the moment. So this could be interesting. I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.